Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Namaskar, welcome to this latest episode of State of Economy, where we are going to talk about high frequency economic indicators, what kind of trends we are seeing in those indicators, and what kind of outlook we are going to have based on those high frequency economic indicators. To talk about all those things, we have with us Mr. Ajit Banerjee from Shriram Life Insurance. Mr. Banerjee, thank you very much for joining us. My first question to you, the GDP number for Q3, which is out, and it says that 6.2% growth in Q3. If we compare with the Q2, which was 5.4%, of course, it shows some expansion. But if we compare with the corresponding quarter of last fiscal, it's much lower. What is your take, sir?
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Rishi, for having me in this podcast. We have to understand that there is always a base effect impact which will be there. So, for example, now that even the previous year numbers also has been revised upwards from 8.2 to 9.2 and all, which is on the backdrop of the previous low base actually. So similarly, like this year also, there will be a adverse base effect impact which will follow through. And that is the way it happens for any number when it is compared with the previous year numbers. So what we have all seen that, previous high GDP growth numbers was predominantly propelled through the higher quantum of the government capex, which was, year on year government was spending primarily to, boost up the economic growth in the aftermath of the pandemic, what we had seen. And government certainly believed that that particular measure was most appropriate because the conversion from capex to GDP growth is much higher as opposed to spending money in over revenue expenditure. That is a well established fact. And naturally government did that, and which has resulted in the numbers what we have seen now. At the same time, government is actually, having a very tightrope walk. On the one hand, it wants to, certainly maintain the GDP growth. At the same time, it want to also, say maintain the fiscal discipline, at the same time fiscal prudence, as we may say. And therefore, year on year, we are seeing that the actual fiscal deficit number as a percentage of GDP has been coming down, which has been now projected at 4.4% for the next year. So if that certainly has to happen, then definitely, there are two, ways which it can happen. Either is that it has to cut down on its expenditure, or the revenue has to go up. Otherwise, the fiscal deficit is the net, differential between the revenue and the expenditure, right? So at this juncture, the government, they have done actually quite a heavy lifting in terms of the capital expenditure to step up the growth over last few years. And after creating that, because it has also the responsibility under the FRBM Act to maintain the fiscal deficit. So definitely this cannot go indefinitely. And as a result of which, it also felt that, GDP growth, even after actually, going heavy on the capex or doing a heavy lifting on the capex, they were seen that the economic recovery was almost a K-shaped recovery, not a U-shaped recovery as it was possibly intended to be. And therefore, I'm sure it would have examined that what is required to ultimately bring the GDP growth back. While at the same time, supply side, it has done its work, but it was not good enough to boost up the, GDP growth. And as a consequence of that, I think this year there was also demand that, the income taxpayers and the middle income group, they were not having enough disposable income at their hand because they are getting heavily taxed. So therefore, the government this time thought that in this year's budget that, on the one hand, it has to maintain the fiscal prudence, cut down on the heavy lifting of the capex, but at the same time, it wanted the GDP growth. So therefore, it actually focused on stepping up the, or rather the looking at the, how it can further, step up the demand side of it. And
Okay.
it, announced various steps and income tax cut, as well as, there are other certain measures. It has not stopped the capex altogether, but if you would have seen that the priorities of capex have shifted this year.
Okay, I will come to that consumption cap from capex to consumption. But before that, I have one very basic question. If we see the 6.2% growth rate in Q3, 5.4% now it has been revised upward to 5.6%.
Correct.
So that means the implied growth, if we have to achieve 6.5% in the overall fiscal, we need an implied growth rate of 7.6% in
Yeah.
Q4.
Yeah.
Is it too optimistic number?
That looks a bit difficult. But at the same time, there are some early indications that the government expenditures, both at the central government and the state government also has stepped up. That's something which is positive. At the same time, private consumption is also going up. But yes, the resultant number, what or derived number, what you just now mentioned, that looks a bit challenging, very frankly, to me also. So, but the indications are looking positive. So I think we should be somewhere close to that, is what I feel so.
Okay. Mr. Banerjee, on the same day when the GDP number was announced, the fiscal deficit number also were out. I'm not going to talk about the headline fiscal number, but one data which is very important for economy is the capex one. And there we are seeing that we need an expenditure of 25% of revised estimate during the month of February and March. That means 1.3 lakh crore rupees every month. And during the current fiscal, if I go by the monthly trend, there have been just two instances when the capital expenditure is more than 1 lakh crore rupees. So going by that, even the revised estimate for capital expenditure lowered from 11.11 to 10.2, that appears to be another challenging factor for the government.
Yeah, I see that's the interesting part, that see capex ultimately and the medium of capex expenditure which the government chose in last few years, the options of further accelerating that is limited actually now. That's the reason even in this year's budget also, if you have seen that the focus areas of government for this capex actually has got shifted, right? So in a way, yes, I can I mean I certainly appreciate the point which you're trying to raise, that see, possibly it has got delayed quite a lot because of multiple factors all known to us, prolonged summer, then election results. So no point in discussing that. But yeah, in a way, as a result of which, in cricket parlance, that run rate has become too high, and that seems to be a bit difficult. So I think we will be. I mean, it seems to be a bit. We will be close to that, but may not be able to, achieve or meet up that required run rate, if I have to say.
Yeah, that's a very good comparison. I mean, most of the people can easily understand, especially when the Champions Trophy is going on.
Yeah.
Now, now coming to another factor which you were mentioning about the budget and where the focus is more on the consumption, but capex has not been ignored. I mean,
Yes.
still we are seeing 11.28 lakh
Correct.
crore of
Correct.
capex.
Absolute level, it has broadly remained in those numbers only. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And even if I take the fiscal deficit of 4.4%, and if our capex is 4.3 of the GDP, that clearly shows that focus is on capex, not on the meeting the revenue expenditure with the help of fiscal deficit. That's another part of that. My basic question to you, sir. Now, when we are talking about more focus on consumption, 1 lakh crore worth of income tax relief has been given to middle class. Do you really think that the consumption will pick up during the next fiscal?
See, there are only that 1 lakh crore is not, I would say, the only tool that will pep up the consumption. However, having said that, there are multiple other factors also which will be helping, in the sense that, see, the agricultural sector also is expected, if if nature god is not against India, or if there is the sufficient good amount of monsoon which is there is not excessive dry or heat wave which was there, if although it is expected to be, but assuming for a moment that if it is not so, then we can expect that the reservoir levels also are good at this point of time. The moisture content in the soil is also good. So all those factors would enable possibly a good amount of monsoon, a good amount of rain, I mean, say harvest. And at the same time, government has also I think increased its say allocation to the revenue expenditures also in various states, direct benefit transfers and all. So that certainly would will step up the consumption. So it is not only that ultimately it is the income tax relaxation what has been given will be only the sole factor in stepping up the consumption. If the agricultural sector is expected to do well, then automatically the services as well as the goods which are associated with the consumption of rural India, that
Hmm.
certainly will be coming back to hit the demand, is something what we can expect.
Okay, so it's a factor, not the factor in the overall consumption mathematics.
Certainly. And
Yeah.
another factor, another thing is which I would also like to mention over here is that, see, generally this particular I would say leeway what has been given in or in the income tax slabs. So that with that money, what will be available as a disposable income, possibly it will help not to increase the consumption of a shampoo or a soap. That would be possibly more for higher amount of income for possibly the durable part,
Yeah.
consumer durables or a consumer asset for that matter.
Yeah.
That would, I think, get a fillip for that matter. uh, that's what I feel and I believe.
Yeah, so you are very right. I mean, that is something what we call as the durable expenditure, and that will lead more to the virtuous cycle. That is the requirement for the
And
day.
even if you see that the recent consumption trend, there is a study which has been done by Deloitte and the Retail Association of India,
Hmm.
which also shows that actually the consumer non-durables are the growth has moderated and has come down, but the consumer discretionary item as well as the consumer durables growth has actually showing up. So I
Okay.
think these trends are pretty basically quite clear that how the shift in the consumption pattern in India is both rural and urban is happening, and I think it is going to continue.
Okay. Now, when we are talking about consumption, one critical factor for boosting the consumption is the GST. And we have seen that the rate rationalization exercise in terms of GST is still going on. And when it will happen, we do not know. But the February collection number, which is basically for the goods consumed in the month of January and the services availed in the month of January, that was a 9% plus growth. Of course, it is lower than January, but we need to keep in mind that the
It's a short
collection,
month.
yeah,
It's a short
28
month.
month. Yeah, 28 months. So 3 days are still there. So
Correct.
I'm not saying that it is lower than January, but 9% growth, I'm taking it. My question to you, sir, I mean, are we seeing a good sign in GST like consumption? If we say consumption is picking up like the government is saying in Q3, is that corresponding increase in GST? We are also recording that.
I'm afraid it is not, because if you see the nominal growth in GDP actually is not commensurate with the nominal growth in the CPI also. If you see, so that is falling. While
Mhm.
9.1 in absolute terms you can say, but then actually that growth is it is actually not adequate at this point of time. And so overall that also shows that there are signs of economy slowing down.
Okay. So now coming to the inflation number, and one very alarming factor or the matter of concern is the weather. I mean, we are seeing that February was completely a hot month. It's not the spring which we have seen, and that is going to impact the wheat harvesting, what we are afraid in that. Considering these things, sir, and since the food inflation was the key in pushing the inflation rate during the last 3 months of the calendar year 24, so what kind of apprehension, what kind of concern you have on the inflation front, sir?
See, while on the overall we have seen that the quantum of food as a component of the overall basket is coming down. That's while that is on a overall basis. But having said that, still like it is close to about 52% in the
Yeah.
I think
Okay, basket.
the basket, and that is something which has a key role to play. So even
Hmm.
if the inflation levels have come down, also is because the food basket prices come down. So I
Hmm.
think that is something which we cannot ignore. So naturally, your question is very valid. That we need to see that ultimately, if there is any adverse weather condition which once again reappears, right? then definitely the primary cereals of India like wheat, rice, and all is definitely something which one has to be mindful of. And we need to also see that what is in the storage in with Food Corporation of India and all that part, to come to a position to see that whether it is sufficient enough to meet the demand of the country, or if it is not, then that might once again lead to food prices getting aggravated, and therefore inflation coming back. That's the possibility is there.
Okay, sir. So now my final question to you, that overall growth prospect for the FY25 as well as for the FY26. We all are talking about 6.5%, 6.4, 6.5%. RBI has a slightly higher 6.6%. What is your take on that?
So I would expect that, of course, I mean, there are certain assumptions which we have to make. I think when we make this call out this number, uh, at this point of time, generally when we make an estimate, also there is a base, there is a conservative, there is a optimistic. Like so, on a base case scenario, I would feel, and another base case scenario, assumptions are that there is not too much of an adverse weather impact. Monsoon is normal. At the same time, there is not too much of a, I would say, difficult. While the global conditions are nowadays certainly very unpredictable at this point of time. At the same time, whereas embargoes are getting placed by the countries. So for a moment, if I assume that other things remaining same, then I think we can expect somewhere in the range of between, this year we should close between 6.25 to 6.4 is something which I expect for this year, which means FY25. And FY26, I would at this point of time keep, my bet at in between 6.5 to 6.75 at the higher end. Actually, that's my number which I want to place.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your views and insight on various macroeconomic fundamentals. And we hope to continue discussing sometime again
Sure.
on the different set of numbers. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
sir.
Nice speaking to you.
Sure. Thank you, sir.